Today I'm showing you how to unleash the true potential of a combination of new and used parts to create a great price to performance gaming PC, all while still looking as good as this. I'm also going to explain which specific components I think are worth buying used versus new no matter what your price range is at, and all of that comes after this quick little montage. Enjoy. Today's video is sponsored by GVG Mall, and you probably already know that I've been using them for so long to activate Windows on a ton of my own builds. They're actually running a huge sale right now, which boosts my normal 18% discount up to 25% off if you use code ZTT18, and I'll have that linked at the top of the description. They not only have Windows keys, but also a ton of other stuff such as Office, and even game keys for platforms like Steam, Origin, and Uplay, and they even have console stuff too, like PSN and Xbox prepaid cards as well. Activating Windows is super simple and only takes like 3 minutes total, so activate Windows today and remove that nasty watermark, and don't forget to use ZTT18 for 25% off. Jumping straight into the parts list, we're going to start with the Ryzen 5 5600G, and this CPU has recently added its way back onto my radar, and I'm finally getting it inside a build. The specific thing I like about this 6-core and 12-threaded chip is the used price, and you can easily find it these days for around $100. Now there are some other options at this price range, such as the Intel i3-12100F, or you can spend just a few bucks more for the 5600, and don't forget about a used 10400F as well. So basically, if you're copying this at home, you'll have some flexibility. I personally paid $105 for mine, but that deal is very repeatable, and you can certainly beat it for yourself with a little bit of patience. The other used part that we have here today is the motherboard, and here I went with what used to be a regular on the channel, the MSI B450 Tomahawk. This used to be a board that you could consistently find for 50 to 60 bucks back in the glory days of Amazon warehouse motherboard deals, but those days are gone, although I did end up snatching this one for $70 off eBay, which is still pretty solid. AM4 motherboards are about $20 to $25 higher on average than what they were about a year ago, but buying the CPU and motherboard used is the second most important spot that I would consider buying used versus new. The advantage of these components is that they're still worth a lot of money whenever people go to upgrade them, so that's why they post them for really good deals, but the downside is the same risk that you have when buying any used component. It could arrive completely jacked up. You need to do your research and buy from someone that's reputable. Remember that the person you buy a used Ryzen CPU from is responsible for transporting your CPU with 1,000 different pins on there, and there's always a chance that they don't secure it well enough and you end up with a broken CPU with pins all over the place. We'll talk about the best component to buy used in just a second, but by buying the CPU and motherboard used, it allows you to buy a powerful combo like this for $175 total, and that's a very solid start to a mid-range gaming PC. One side note is that the only real problem with the B450 Tomahawk is that there's no 3-pin ARGB header on there. Keep that in mind if you're designing a system around it. Moving on though, next up we get to the RAM, and since we're building a white PC today, we went with the tried and tested XPG GAMX D45 2x8GB kit that's clocked at 3200 MHz. I thought this $45 price range was just a good sale, but this price has actually remained the same for several months now, so this has been a reliable purchase for me for these all-white builds. And speaking of reliable purchases, we'll talk about this power supply, and this is yet another Thermaltake BM2.
Again? Seriously?
This time I got this 650 watt version and I paid $55 for it brand new off Newegg. Again, for the 1000th time, this is one of the more reliable and better tier C units out there, and that 550 watt one has been going on some serious sales often, but for a 1440p build like this, we needed a little bit extra wattage, which is why I got this one. And plugged into it, of course, are some cable extensions. I'm going back to the easy DIY ones because we found that we had some problems with Formula Mod only coming with 2 cable combs, and with easy DIY ones, you just put on however much you need. When you have a case that doesn't have a hole underneath the GPU for the power cable, you'll usually need 3 or 4 cable combs for just that, and with Formula Mod only coming with 2, it doesn't allow the cables to get as clean as I want to. Again, the aesthetics over everything mindset trumps everything. Moving on though, we gotta talk about some storage, and I'm starting to use more and more 1TB drives because the prices are just continuing to drop, but for today's build, I'm actually using an SSD that I already have, but I'll show you what to buy. This here is the Corsair MP400 1TB NVMe drive that I scrapped from a previous build, and it's
it's indeed a really solid drive, but for a mid-range slash budget new and used build, I'd probably recommend something a bit cheaper. Drives like the MP33, Patriot P310, or Crucial P3 are all really good budget options, but feel free to go with whichever one you find a good deal on. For my consulting orders lately, ZachsTechRiff.com/consulting, a lot of people are still only requesting in their parts list that I use a 500GB NVMe drive, but because the price differences are so low lately, I've been still recommending the 1TB because that's what makes sense for most builds, so just keep that in mind whenever you're purchasing your build. Next up, let's talk about the aesthetics here for a bit, obviously my favorite part of the video, and for the case, the Montech Sky 2 is making a return to the channel, and oh boy do I love this case. I actually used the blue version in a recent $1,000 build guide video that I'll have linked in the upper right hand corner, but here we obviously have the white version which costs $105, and it's honestly pretty good value for what you're getting. It comes with 3 pre-installed RGB fans that can be controlled with an LED button. Again, we don't have a 3-pin header on our motherboard today, and I'm also a huge fan of the front glass panel, which is the meta we're seeing so often now in 2023. The overall layout of this case is super neat because you can see inside the build and the RGB parts from several directions, and the mesh bottom part for the power supply basement is pretty unique as well. In terms of airflow, it's intaking air from the back side, and those are reverse looking fans by the way, and we'll see soon in the benchmarking section that we didn't have a problem with cooling at all. And the other thing for aesthetics that we have aside from the cable extensions that I already talked about is the CPU cooler, and per usual, I just went ahead and rotated and painted the stock Ryzen cooler that came with the 5600G. We actually got some footage of this process finally, and the number one tip that I want to share with you all is all about the opacity levels. The first coat of paint should only ever be around 25% opacity, as this gives the next coat of paint something to stick onto, and then you should just continue building from there. You should always wait at least 10 minutes in between coats, and I usually aim for around 50% opacity after coat number 2, 75% opacity after number 3, and then after that you're just finishing it up and adding a good layer of paint on there to prevent any scratches or nicks. I usually end up painting around 7 or 8 total coats for these coolers, and this is exactly how I do it for our Frostnova builds as well. If you don't already know, we have a little restock build section here on the zttbuilds.com website, and we do our best to keep these builds always available and in stock, and you guys have been hammering them, so big thanks for the support on that. And moving on, we have one final part left, and here's the other place where you really should consider buying used, especially if you value price to performance. And here I have the Gigabyte Vision RTX 3070, which you can honestly find pretty easily for around $330 to $350. I know, that price might sound absolutely crazy if you've only ever considered buying a new NVIDIA graphics card, but the used market for GPUs has been popping lately, and you can save literally hundreds of dollars on your build by going down this route. Again, there's obviously more risk when doing this, and I don't necessarily recommend a first-time PC builder to do this, but if you know what to look for and you can tell what's legit or not and how to determine if a seller is reputable or not, then this is how you save the hundreds of dollars on your build. And also, this Gigabyte Vision card looks gorgeous inside an all-white build like this. I really do wish that silver section was all white, but that's just my personal preference. But from the side view perspective, this objectively looks amazing. This RTX 3070 is also a fantastic card because it's great for 1080p, higher FPS and competitive gaming, but you can also play every single game in 1440p if you wanted to, and we benchmarked both resolutions for you guys in this video. Before jumping into that though, here's what the final parts list is looking like, and if you're trying to copy this for yourself, you'll need to pay anywhere from $750 to $800 on a build like this. Remember that the way you get a Ryzen 5 and RTX 3070 build to cost this much is to buy the CPU, motherboard, and especially GPU used. This would otherwise be like an $1,100 or $1,200 build if you bought it all new. Saving that kind of money is definitely worth it to someone like me, and especially you PC enthusiasts that are in our ZTT Discord server, link down below. But this is up to you and you alone, and let me know down in the comment section if you're the type of person that's willing to gamble like that. With that aside though, let's jump into some benchmarks, and we have an absolute ton of data for you today. We'll start with the 1080p benchmarks, and then we'll get into 1440p. Here you can see for games like Apex Legends in 1080p with very high settings, it was no match at all, as we got an FPS average of 171. Same thing for Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, even in 1080p with ultra settings, we got 120 FPS, and most people aren't even gonna play a competitive shooter like this with ultra settings. Here's the full 20 game benchmarking run for 1080p, and clearly this RTX 3070 and 5600G combo can handle any of these titles and settings. Everything here except for Fortnite and CSGO was put at the max or close to max settings, and we got really high FPS numbers here. Transitioning over to 1440p, this build is still no slouch either, as in Hogwarts Legacy with 1440p and high, we still got a very respectable 96 FPS, which is pretty solid for a tougher to run game like this. Same goes for Fortnite. We use 1440p and Pro, which is what I would actually recommend doing if you're using a 1440p monitor with this title, and here we still got way higher than what we actually need with 241 FPS. Here's the full benchmarking charts for the 1440p run, and we're still actually either at max or close to max with all of these titles, and it's pretty crazy to see that just a $750 to $800 system is capable of running these games so well in 1440p and with a higher refresh rate monitor if you wanted to. And just for a point of reference, we did run 3D Mark's TimeSpy, and this build cranked out a score of $1,265. You absolutely love to see that kind of number for a build price like this. Crazy price to performance. And if you want the best price to performance on your next gaming PC build, then consider buying one of my consulting services at zackstechdrive.com/consulting, because I'd love to help you out with that. Over on zackstechdrive.com/consulting, which is linked down below, I've been putting together parts lists for people so they're ensured that their gaming PC is exactly how they want it with the highest potential possible. I work directly with you whether you want the higher FPS or if you want to focus more on aesthetics. Either way, I got you covered. And if you're looking for some more ideas on a build that's priced around this similar price point, then feel free to click the video that's on the screen now.